I never imagined that one day I'd be teaching my own son a lesson. Life has these turning points, doesn't it? One moment you're being humiliated. The next, you hold all the power. My name is Martha Sullivan. I'm 72 years old. And today I'm sharing the story that completely changed my life and taught me it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. The words still burn in my memory like they were spoken yesterday. Get your hands off there, you poor old woman. You have no money for anything. Each syllable dripping with contempt. Each word a deliberate knife aimed straight at my heart. And the worst part? These weren't the words of some rude stranger in a boutique. They came from Victoria, my own daughter-in-law, spoken in front of a store full of people, while my son Richard stood silently beside her, eyes fixed on his expensive Italian shoes. 40 years as an elementary school teacher in Westfield, Connecticut. 4 decades of shaping young minds, of staying late to help struggling students, of spending my own money on classroom supplies when the budget ran short. All those years of hard work, and this was what I'd become in their eyes. A burden, an embarrassment. A poor old woman who shouldn't even touch a beautiful dress in an upscale boutique. I remember staring at my reflection in the store's mirror that day, wondering when exactly I had become invisible. When had my opinions, my feelings, my very presence become something my son and his wife merely tolerated rather than valued? The woman staring back at me had gray hair neatly pulled back in a bun, wrinkles earned from years of both laughter and worry, and eyes that had suddenly grown steely with resolve. Something shifted inside me in that moment of public humiliation. A lifetime of accommodating others, of putting my son's needs before my own, of swallowing hurts without complaint. It all crystallized into a single thought: no more. What Victoria and Richard didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't just an old teacher living on a modest pension in Cedar Grove apartments. For 5 years, I had been fighting a silent battle, one that would soon turn the tables in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. After my husband James died of a heart attack 15 years ago, I threw myself into 2 things: my teaching career and raising Richard. We had always lived modestly, but we were comfortable. Our home was filled with books instead of luxury items, and our vacations were road trips to national parks rather than exotic destinations. I thought I had raised a son who understood the value of character over possessions, of kindness over status. Richard was a bright boy, always good with numbers. He graduated with honors from UConn, with a business degree that I had helped pay for by taking on extra summer school classes. When he wanted to start his own real estate development company, I didn't hesitate to withdraw $50,000 from my retirement savings, nearly a third of my life's savings, to help him get started. It's an investment in your future, I told him, beaming with pride as he accepted the check. The business flourished. Richard had a natural talent for spotting undervalued properties and transforming them into profitable investments. Within 5 years, he had paid back my loan, though without interest, and was moving in increasingly elite social circles. That's where he met Victoria Harrington, daughter of one of Connecticut's oldest banking families. Victoria was beautiful in that polished, perfect way that speaks of privilege and careful curation. Designer clothes, immaculate hair, the kind of confident posture that comes from never having been told no in your life. When Richard first brought her to meet me at my apartment, I noticed the slight wrinkle of her nose as she surveyed my modest living room with its comfortable but worn furniture, the framed student artwork on the walls, the bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks. "What a cozy place," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Richard mentioned you've lived here since his father passed. Have you ever thought about upgrading to something more current?" Richard laughed uncomfortably. "Mom likes it here. All her friends are nearby, right, Mom?" I remembered nodding, determined to like this woman whom my son had chosen. "It suits me just fine. I've never been one for keeping up with trends." "That's obvious," Victoria replied with a glance at my simple cardigan and slacks. "We should take you shopping sometime. A little makeover might be fun." That was the beginning. Small comments, seemingly well-intentioned suggestions that gradually revealed their true nature. Victoria saw me as a project to be fixed, or better yet, hidden away like an embarrassing family secret. And Richard, my once compassionate son, began to see me through her eyes. The invitations to their home in Lakeside Heights grew less frequent. When I did visit, I was seated at the far end of the dining table, away from Victoria's friends with their discussions of European vacations and country club memberships. Richard would dutifully check in with a brief weekly phone call that grew shorter each time. When my granddaughter Lily was born, I was allowed to visit only at scheduled times that seemed to shrink with each passing year. "It's just that we're so busy, Mom," Richard would explain when I expressed hurt at being excluded from family events. "Victoria has her social obligations, and you know how it is. These connections are important for business." I did know. I was becoming increasingly aware of exactly where I stood in their new world. Nowhere. The final indignity came last Christmas. I had spent weeks knitting a beautiful cashmere scarf for Victoria and had found a first edition copy of Richard's favorite childhood book for him, gifts that represented thought and care rather than extravagance. When I arrived at their lavish home, the tree was surrounded by professionally wrapped packages from high-end stores. Victoria opened my gift with barely concealed disappointment. "Oh, handmade! How traditional!" The scarf was immediately set aside, never to be worn. Richard flipped through the book with distracted interest before thanking me politely and placing it on a shelf where I suspect it still sits, untouched. Later that evening, I overheard Victoria speaking to her mother in the kitchen. Yes, Richard's mother brought her usual thrift store presents. I don't know why she bothers. It's not like we need anything she can afford. Honestly, it's getting embarrassing having her at these gatherings. She just doesn't fit in. Each word was a needle piercing my heart, but I said nothing. I made an excuse to leave early, trudging through the snow back to my empty apartment, wondering when my son had become someone I barely recognized. What they didn't know was that 6 months earlier, I had made a discovery that would change everything. While cleaning out my mother's old trunk after she passed, I found a collection of yellowed documents, property deeds, land surveys, and legal correspondence dating back to the 1970s. My grandfather had owned a significant tract of land in what was now downtown Westfield, land that included the very spot where Riverside Mall currently stood, the crown jewel of commercial real estate in the county. The documents revealed a troubling story. During the economic turmoil of the 1970s, the land had been acquired through questionable legal maneuvers by developers with political connections. My grandfather, who spoke limited English and trusted the wrong people, had effectively been swindled out of property worth millions. With trembling hands, I had gathered these papers and taken them to a law office downtown. Not one of the prestigious firms with glass towers and marble lobbies, but a modest practice run by Thomas Green, a 66-year-old attorney known for taking on challenging cases that larger firms avoided. "This won't be easy, Mrs. Sullivan," Thomas warned after reviewing the documents. "We're talking about events from decades ago, challenging powerful interests who won't give up without a fight. The legal fees alone could be substantial." "I have savings," I replied with determination, "and time, plenty of time." And so began my secret battle. For 5 years, I lived even more frugally than before. I canceled my basic cable subscription, started growing vegetables on my small balcony, took on tutoring jobs despite being retired. Every penny I could spare went toward legal fees, as Thomas meticulously built our case, tracking down witnesses, researching precedents, gathering evidence of the irregularities in how my family's land had been acquired. No one knew, not my friends, not my neighbors, and certainly not Richard and Victoria. Why would I tell them? To Richard, I had become an inconvenience, and to Victoria, an embarrassment. Let them believe what they wanted about the poor old woman living on a teacher's pension. I had something far more valuable than their approval. I had truth on my side, and increasingly, the law as well. Which brings me back to that fateful day at Riverside Mall, when Victoria grabbed my wrist as I reached out to touch a beautiful blue dress in the window of Elegance Boutique. "Get your hands off there, you poor old woman," she hissed, loud enough for other shoppers to hear. "You have no money for anything." The boutique fell silent. The saleswoman looked away in embarrassment, and Richard, my own son, simply stared at his watch as if checking how much longer he'd have to endure this outing with his mother. Little did they know what was about to happen. Just the day before, I had received the call I'd been waiting for from Thomas Green. The court had ruled in our favor. The evidence of fraud in the original land acquisition was overwhelming. As the sole surviving heir, I was now legally entitled to 65% ownership of Riverside Mall, a property valued at over $200 million. The final paperwork would be signed that Friday, but the mall management had already been notified of the imminent change in ownership. As Victoria's words hung in the air and shoppers stared, I reached into my purse for my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. In fact, I felt calmer than I had in years as I dialed the number I'd been given just yesterday. Mr. Cooper, this is Martha Sullivan. I'm at Elegance Boutique and need your assistance immediately. Within minutes, James Cooper arrived at Elegance Boutique with 2 security guards. He was a tall man with the confident posture of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement before taking the mall security position. His presence alone seemed to quiet the boutique as customers and staff watched the scene unfold. Mrs. Sullivan, he greeted me with unexpected deference. How can I help you today? Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up in confusion. Richard shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly trying to make sense of how the head of mall security knew his mother by name, his supposedly insignificant, financially struggling mother. But to understand how I arrived at this pivotal moment, you need to know the journey that brought me here. My story didn't begin in that boutique. It began decades earlier in a modest 2-bedroom home on Maple Street, where I raised Richard alone after my husband's sudden death. I was 57 when I retired from Springfield Elementary after 4 decades of teaching 3rd graders. The school held a retirement party for me in the gymnasium, decorated with handmade cards from current and former students. Several of my students had grown up to become teachers themselves, doctors, engineers, even a state senator. They came back to honor the woman who had believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves. Richard was there too, looking handsome in his new suit, beaming with what I thought was pride. "Great party, Mom," he said afterward as he helped me carry gifts to my car. "You really made an impact on these people." "I tried my best," I replied, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. Teaching was never just a job for me. Those children were my life's work. Richard nodded, checking his expensive watch, a new habit I'd noticed. "Speaking of work, I should head back to the office. Big client meeting tomorrow." That was the beginning of a subtle shift. As my daily purpose of teaching faded into retirement, Richard's career was skyrocketing. He had started Sullivan Real Estate Development 5 years earlier with my $50,000, money I'd saved carefully over decades, skipping vacations and driving the same reliable Toyota for 15 years. "Mom, this is the opportunity of a lifetime," he had explained passionately when asking for the loan. "There's this commercial property that's severely undervalued. I can flip it within a year and double our investment." He was right. Within 18 months, he had paid back my loan, though without the interest a bank would have charged, and was rapidly expanding his business. I was so proud watching my son succeed, never imagining that his success would eventually build a wall between us. 6 months after my retirement, Richard met Victoria Harrington at a charity gala. She came from old money. Her father owned Harrington Financial Group, one of the largest investment firms in New England. Their courtship was brief and glossy, featured in the society pages of the Westfield Chronicle. I met her only twice before their engagement was announced. "She's different from the women you've dated before," I observed carefully after our first meeting, stirring sugar into my tea at Maple Street Diner, our traditional Sunday breakfast spot. "She's ambitious and connected, Mom. Do you know who her father is?" Richard's eyes lit up. "With Victoria by my side, I can take the business to a whole new level." I hesitated, setting down my spoon. "Is that the main reason you're with her?" Richard looked annoyed. "Of course not. She's beautiful, sophisticated, worldly, everything I want in a partner. What about kindness, compassion, the things that matter when looks fade and business deals come and go?" He sighed in that way adult children do when they think their parents just don't understand. "Mom, this isn't the 1950s. Victoria and I have a modern relationship based on mutual goals and ambitions. I didn't press further. Perhaps I should have. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at the Lakeside Heights Country Club with 500 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I wore a simple blue dress I had purchased specially for the occasion, spending more than I normally would to ensure I looked appropriate. Victoria's mother took one look at me during the rehearsal dinner and pulled her daughter aside. I wasn't meant to overhear their conversation, but I did. "Darling, couldn't you have taken Richard's mother shopping for something more suitable? She looks like she's attending a school board meeting, not her son's wedding." Victoria sighed. "I tried, Mother, but she's so set in her ways. You know how these teacher types are, practical to a fault." I pretended not to hear, smiling through the evening and during the entire wedding day. I was seated at a table far from the main wedding party, with distant relatives who seemed equally out of place amidst the champagne fountains and ice sculptures. After the wedding, the distance grew. Richard and Victoria bought a sprawling estate in Lakeside Heights, complete with a pool house larger than my entire apartment. My weekly calls to Richard became monthly, then sporadic. Their housewarming party didn't include me. I learned about it through a former colleague whose daughter catered the event. When Lily was born, I expected things might change. I rushed to the hospital with a hand-knitted baby blanket I'd been working on for months, only to be told by a nurse that Mrs. Sullivan is resting and not accepting visitors outside immediate family. "I'm Richard's mother," I explained, confused. "Oh, I'm so sorry. They only listed the Harringtons on the approved visitors list. Let me check with them." I waited in the hall for 40 minutes before Richard emerged, looking tired but happy. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming today. We're kind of overwhelmed with everything." "I'm your mother, Richard. Of course I came today." I held out the blue and yellow blanket. "For my granddaughter." He took it awkwardly. "Thanks, Mom. Look, Victoria's parents are here, and the doctor says too many visitors might expose the baby to germs. Could you maybe come back next week when things have settled down?" I swallowed my hurt. "Of course. Whatever's best for the baby." That pattern continued as Lily grew. I was allowed carefully scheduled visits, always under Victoria's watchful eye. "Don't pick her up like that, Mrs. Sullivan," she would say. Or, "We don't let Lily eat processed sugar," when I offered a small cookie I'd baked. Every interaction felt supervised, as though I couldn't be trusted with my own granddaughter. For Lily's 5th birthday, I saved for months to buy her a beautiful dollhouse, handcrafted by a local artisan. When she opened it at her party, a lavish affair with pony rides and a hired princess performer, Victoria's reaction was immediate. "Oh my, how rustic," she said with that tight smile. "Lily already has the Victorian dollhouse from FAO Schwartz that Grandma and Grandpa Harrington gave her last Christmas. But this can go in the playroom, I suppose." I watched the dollhouse being carried away, never to be played with. Later that evening, I overheard Victoria talking to a friend. "Richard's mother brought this handmade dollhouse. Can you imagine? When Lily has the limited edition collector's item my parents bought? It's like she doesn't even try to understand our lifestyle." As the years passed, my retirement savings dwindled. The pension covered my basic needs, but there was little left for extras. I never complained to Richard. Pride wouldn't allow it. But I did start tutoring part-time and volunteering at the library to stay busy and supplement my income. Then came the discovery that would change everything. My mother passed away quietly in her sleep at 92, leaving me her small collection of possessions. As I sorted through her things in my apartment, I found an old leather trunk I hadn't seen in years. Inside, beneath photo albums and knitting patterns, was a manila envelope marked "Sullivan Property, Important." The contents stunned me. Deed records, surveys, legal correspondence, and newspaper clippings dating back to the 1970s. According to these documents, my grandfather had owned over 40 acres of prime land in what was now downtown Westfield, land that currently housed the Riverside Mall and surrounding commercial developments. The papers told a disturbing story. During the economic turbulence of the 1970s, when interest rates skyrocketed and many families faced financial hardship, a development company called Westfield Commercial Partners had acquired the land through what appeared to be manipulative and potentially illegal means. My grandfather An immigrant with limited English proficiency had signed documents he didn't fully understand after being told it was a temporary lease arrangement. What he actually signed was a sale agreement for a fraction of the property's value. My hands trembled as I read through a letter my grandfather had written to an attorney, explaining how he'd been deceived. The attorney's response was equally troubling. While I sympathize with your situation, the statute of limitations for fraud claims is 3 years. As this transaction occurred 5 years ago, I regret that legal remedies may be limited. My grandfather had died believing he had failed the family by losing our greatest asset. My mother had kept these documents, perhaps hoping someday justice might be possible. I sat among the papers late into the night, pieces falling into place. The land where Riverside Mall now stood, the very mall where Victoria loved to shop, where she bought those designer clothes and accessories that signaled her status, was rightfully my family's property. The next morning, I called my friend Sophia Winters. We had worked together at community events for decades, and she knew everyone in town. Sophia, I need a good attorney, someone who isn't afraid to take on powerful interests. This sounds serious, Martha. What's going on? I can't explain everything yet, but I found some documents that suggest my family was defrauded out of valuable property decades ago. There was a pause before Sophia replied. You should talk to Thomas Green. He's semi-retired now, but still takes on special cases. If anyone can help with something like this, it's him. Thomas Green's office was in a converted Victorian home downtown, far from the gleaming skyscrapers where corporate lawyers worked. His secretary, a woman about my age, showed me in without pretension. Thomas himself was a distinguished man of 66, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He listened intently as I explained my discovery, examining each document with careful attention. Mrs. Sullivan, these records suggest a serious case of fraud, he said finally. The challenge is the time that has passed. However, there's a legal principle called fraudulent concealment that might help us. If we can prove the fraud was deliberately concealed, preventing your family from discovering it, the statute of limitations might be extended. What are our chances? I asked. He leaned back, considering. I won't sugarcoat this. We're talking about challenging the ownership of one of the most valuable commercial properties in the county. The current owners will fight with everything they have. It could take years, and the legal fees will be substantial. I have some savings, I said, though the thought of depleting my modest nest egg was frightening. Thomas studied me for a moment. Tell you what, I'll take this case on contingency. If we win, my firm receives a percentage of the recovery. If we lose, you pay only the hard costs for filing fees and research. Why would you do that? He smiled slightly. Let's just say I've spent my career watching powerful interests take advantage of regular people. I'm near retirement myself. This would be a fitting capstone to my legal career. And so began our quiet battle. For 5 years, Thomas and his small team meticulously built our case, tracking down former employees of Westfield Commercial Partners who were willing to testify about questionable business practices, finding other families who had similar experiences, and documenting how the fraud had been deliberately concealed through shell companies and misleading paperwork. During this time, my relationship with Richard and Victoria deteriorated further. When I couldn't afford an expensive birthday gift for Lily, Victoria made snide comments about budget constraints. When I couldn't attend a family dinner because I was meeting with Thomas, though I didn't tell them that, Richard accused me of not prioritizing family. The final indignity came at Lily's 10th birthday party. Victoria had arranged for a famous children's author to sign books for each child. When I arrived with my gift, a handmade scrapbook filled with family photos and stories, Victoria barely acknowledged it. "Just put it with the other gifts, Mrs. Sullivan," she said dismissively. "The children are about to meet Regina Taylor. She flew in from New York specially for this." Later, as I watched Lily from across the elaborate garden party, Victoria approached me with a thin smile. "Mrs. Sullivan, Richard and I have been talking. We're concerned about you living alone at your age." "I'm perfectly fine," I replied. "My health is good, and I have friends nearby. Still, those stairs at Cedar Grove must be challenging, and the neighborhood isn't what it used to be." Her voice dripped with false concern. "We've found a lovely senior living community in Westfield. Very appropriate for someone in your situation. I understood immediately what she was suggesting. They wanted me tucked away out of sight, no longer an embarrassment to their carefully curated image. Thank you for your concern, Victoria, but I'm happy where I am. She persisted. We really must insist you consider it. Richard worries about you. She lowered her voice. Besides, your apartment must be quite valuable now. The proceeds from selling it could help cover the senior living costs. They wanted my apartment, my home, my only real asset, not out of concern for my welfare, but to remove what they saw as a blemish on their perfect life. I left the party early that day, hurt and angry, but I channeled that emotion into determination. The next morning I called Thomas. How close are we? I asked without preamble. We're filing the final motions next week, he replied. The judge seems sympathetic to our evidence. I don't want to get your hopes up, Martha, but I think we might actually win this. A week later, Richard called unexpectedly. Mom, Victoria and I want to take you to lunch tomorrow at Riverside Mall. There's a new restaurant there we think you'll enjoy. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very mall built on my family's stolen property. That sounds lovely, Richard, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. What time should I be ready? And that's how I found myself at Riverside Mall the next day, watching Victoria reach for my wrist as I touched a beautiful blue dress at Elegance Boutique, her voice sharp with contempt. Get your hands off there, you poor old woman. You have no money for anything. As James Cooper, the head of security, approached us in the boutique, the pieces of my long journey were about to come together in a moment of reckoning that none of us could have anticipated. Mrs. Sullivan? James Cooper's deep voice carried authority as he addressed me in the suddenly quiet boutique. Is everything all right here? The look on Victoria's face transformed from smug superiority to confusion. Her perfectly manicured hand dropped from my wrist as if suddenly burned. James, I replied calmly, straightening my shoulders. This woman just physically grabbed me and verbally assaulted me in front of everyone. That's ridiculous. Victoria's voice rose an octave. Richard, say something. This is your mother making a scene. My son finally found his voice, though it wavered with uncertainty. Mom, let's not blow this out of proportion. Victoria didn't mean anything by it. James Cooper's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes were kind as they met mine. Would you like to file a complaint, Mrs. Sullivan? Or would you prefer I escort these individuals from the premises? Victoria's mouth fell open. Escort us? Do you have any idea who we are? My husband is Richard Sullivan of Sullivan Real Estate Development. We spend thousands of dollars in this mall every month. A slight smile touched James's lips. I'm well aware of who you are, Mrs. Sullivan, and I'm also aware of who this lady is. He gestured respectfully toward me. Mall security has been briefed on the changes in ownership that will be taking place this week. The color drained from Victoria's face. Richard looked from James to me, comprehension still not dawning. Mom? What is he talking about? Richard's brow furrowed. What changes in ownership? I had imagined this moment countless times over the past 5 years. In my imagination, I'd been triumphant, perhaps even a bit smug, but standing there in Elegance Boutique with my son's confused face before me, I felt only a profound sadness for what our relationship had become. Let's sit down somewhere private to discuss this, I suggested, my voice softer than I'd intended. I'm not going anywhere until someone explains what's happening, Victoria insisted, her perfect poise cracking. Very well. I took a deep breath. 5 years ago, I found documents among your grandmother's belongings, Richard. Documents proving that this land, where Riverside Mall now stands, was wrongfully taken from our family in the 1970s. Richard's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. What are you talking about, Mom? Your great-grandfather owned over 40 acres here. Developers used fraudulent practices to acquire it for a fraction of its worth. I've spent the last 5 years in a legal battle to reclaim what rightfully belongs to our family. I paused, letting the words sink in. Yesterday, the court ruled in our favor. As of Friday, I will legally own 65% of Riverside Mall. The boutique had gone completely silent. Even the salespeople had stopped pretending to fold clothes and were openly staring. Victoria's face had turned an alarming shade of white, while Richard looked like he'd been struck by lightning. This is absurd, Victoria finally sputtered. Some old documents? After all these years? No court would... I assure you, the ruling is quite real, came a new voice from the boutique entrance. Thomas Green stood there, briefcase in hand, his silver hair gleaming under the boutique's elegant lighting. I apologize for the intrusion, Martha. When you didn't answer your phone, I thought I might find you here. The judge has moved up the final signing to tomorrow morning. Victoria whirled toward my attorney. Who are you? Thomas Green, legal counsel for Mrs. Sullivan. He handed her his business card with practiced ease. The court has recognized the extensive evidence of fraud in the original land acquisition. The statute of limitations was extended due to documented fraudulent concealment, all quite standard in cases like these, though admittedly rare. Richard finally found his voice. Mom, why didn't you tell me about this? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken hurt and years of growing distance. Would you have believed me, Richard? I asked quietly. Would you have supported me against powerful interests, as you call them? Or would you have dismissed me as a foolish old woman chasing an impossible dream? His silence was answer enough. James Cooper cleared his throat. Mrs. Sullivan, would you like me to escort these individuals from the premises, or would you prefer to continue your conversation elsewhere? I looked at my son, the little boy I had raised alone, who had once brought me dandelions clutched in his small fist, who had cried on my shoulder when his father died, who had somehow become this stranger standing before me in an expensive suit, unable to defend his mother against cruelty. I think we're done here, I said finally. James, please see that Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan leave the premises. Mom, you can't be serious, Richard protested. You're having us thrown out of the mall. I believe your wife made it clear that I don't belong here, I replied, my voice steady despite the ache in my heart. It seems the situation has reversed rather suddenly. As James and his security team began to escort them toward the exit, Victoria found her voice again. This isn't over. We have connections. We know people. Her threats echoed hollowly as they disappeared from view. The boutique remained silent for several long moments before the manager approached me tentatively. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Patricia Moore. I want to apologize for what happened in my store today. Had I known who you were, I raised my hand to stop her. Had you known I was wealthy, you would have treated me differently. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? She had the grace to look ashamed. Can I show you some of our new arrivals? Perhaps the blue dress you were admiring earlier. Looking at the dress that had started this confrontation, I felt a sudden weariness. Another time, perhaps. Thomas, I turned to my attorney. You mentioned the signing is tomorrow. He nodded. The judge was impressed by our evidence and wanted to expedite the process. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, if that works for you. I'll be there. I gathered my modest purse, suddenly aware of how out of place it looked among the luxury handbags displayed throughout the store. I think I've had enough shopping for one day. As Thomas and I walked through the mall toward the exit, I noticed how differently people looked at me, or rather, how they didn't look through me anymore. Store managers nodded respectfully. Security guards stood slightly straighter. The invisibility of age and perceived poverty had been replaced by the visibility of wealth and power. Are you all right, Martha? Thomas asked as we reached his car. That was quite a confrontation. I've had 5 years to prepare for this moment, I replied, gazing back at the gleaming facade of Riverside Mall. I just never expected it would hurt so much. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, watching the sunset paint golden streaks across my small living room. The phone had rung several times. Richard, then Victoria, then Richard again. But I let the calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to speak with them yet. Instead, I called my friend Sophia. Martha, I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. There's a rumor flying around town that you're buying Riverside Mall. Is it true? I couldn't help but laugh at her characteristically direct approach. Not buying, Sophia. Reclaiming. It's a long story. Well, I have a bottle of Merlot and all evening. Why don't I come over? An hour later, Sophia sat on my worn sofa, glass in hand, as I recounted the day's events and the 5-year journey that had led to them. I knew you were up to something these past few years, she said when I finished. Always checking your watch during our lunch dates, mysterious appointments you couldn't talk about. I thought maybe you had a secret boyfriend." We both laughed at that, the tension of the day finally beginning to release. "What will you do now?" Sophia asked, refilling our glasses. "You're a wealthy woman, Martha. You could buy a mansion in Lakeside Heights right next to Richard and Victoria. Wouldn't that be delicious?" I shook my head. I have no interest in moving to Lakeside Heights. This apartment has been my home for 20 years. My neighbors are my friends. Mrs. Gonzalez downstairs waters my plants when I'm away. Mr. Jenkins next door shovels the walkway when it snows. But you could at least renovate. Get that leaky faucet fixed properly, update the kitchen, maybe some modest improvements, I conceded. But I'm not interested in changing who I am, Sophia. That's what Richard and Victoria never understood. They saw my lifestyle as a failure, as if living simply meant I hadn't succeeded. They never understood it was a choice. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "So what will you do with your newfound wealth and power?" It was a question I'd pondered throughout the 5 years of legal battles. At first, my motivation had been simple justice, reclaiming what had been wrongfully taken from my family. But as the possibility of victory became more real, I'd begun to consider what it would mean. "I want to use it to make a difference," I said slowly. All those years teaching, I saw children with so much potential held back by circumstances beyond their control. Bright kids who couldn't afford college, creative minds stifled by poverty, elderly people forgotten by society. Martha Sullivan, community benefactor. Sophia raised her glass in a toast. I can see it now. "Nothing so grandiose," I protested. "But I'm thinking about establishing a community center in part of the mall, free health screenings for seniors, tutoring programs for disadvantaged youth, job training for those trying to re-enter the workforce. The mall management will have a fit," Sophia chuckled. "Those spaces rent for thousands per month." "Well, the mall management now answers to me," I replied, still marveling at the reality of it. "I own 65% of Riverside Mall, Sophia. I get to decide what happens there." The phone rang again, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed Richard's cell number. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you going to answer it? He's called 6 times now." I sighed, setting down my wine glass. "I suppose I should. Would you mind?" "Say no more." She stood, gathering her purse. "Call me tomorrow after the signing. And Martha, I'm proud of you. Not because you're suddenly wealthy, but because you fought for what was right even when no one believed in you." After seeing Sophia out, I took a deep breath and returned Richard's call. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, finally! I've been trying to reach you for hours." I needed some time to think, Richard. I kept my voice neutral, unwilling to give in to either anger or sentimentality. "Is it true? About the mall, about owning 65% of it?" His voice held a note of desperation I hadn't heard before. "Yes, it's true. The final documents will be signed tomorrow morning." There was a long pause. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom? All these years. When would I have told you, Richard? During the brief phone calls where you were always too busy to talk, at the family gatherings where I was seated at the far end of the table, or perhaps during one of Victoria's lectures about how I embarrass you with my modest lifestyle." His sharp intake of breath told me my words had hit their mark. "I never said you embarrassed me," he protested weakly. "You didn't have to say it. You showed it in 1,000 small ways." I felt the weight of years of hurt in my words. "When you stood silently while Victoria belittled me, when you excluded me from family events, when you began treating me like an obligation rather than your mother. That's not fair. I've been busy building a business, providing for my family. A business you started with my money, Richard. Money I gave you freely without conditions because I believed in you. How quickly you forgot that." Another long silence. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now I become the majority owner of Riverside Mall. Beyond that, I haven't decided." "I meant with us, Mom. What happens with us, with our family?" The question caught me off guard. In all my planning, in all my preparation for this moment, I hadn't fully considered what would come after. Would I cut Richard out of my life entirely? Could I forgive the years of neglect and disrespect? And what about Lily, my granddaughter who had grown up barely knowing me? "I don't know, Richard," I answered honestly. "That depends on whether you want a relationship with your mother or with the owner of Riverside Mall." "You're being unfair," he said, his voice tight. "This is a lot to process." "Yes, it is, for both of us. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I think we both need some time. The signing is tomorrow at 9. After that, we can talk again when you've had time to think about what kind of relationship you want with me. Not my money, not my property, but me. I hung up before he could respond. Emotional exhaustion washing over me in waves. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of 5 years of legal battles, the official recognition of what had been wrongfully taken from my family decades ago. It should have been a moment of pure triumph. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of vindication and sorrow. Justice would be served, but at what cost to my relationship with my only child? As I prepared for bed that night, I remembered something my mother had told me long ago. Life rarely gives us perfect victories, Martha. Most victories come with a touch of loss, and most losses with a touch of victory. The wisdom is in recognizing both. Tomorrow would bring a victory decades in the making. I could only hope it might eventually lead to healing what had been broken between Richard and me. I barely slept that night. The digital clock on my nightstand seemed to move in slow motion, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. By 5:30 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and made my way to the kitchen to brew a pot of coffee. Standing by my small window overlooking Cedar Street, I watched the neighborhood gradually come to life. The newspaper delivery person making their rounds, early risers walking dogs, a few cars beginning their morning commutes. Today, everything would change. After 5 years of legal battles, countless meetings, depositions, and anxious waiting, justice would finally be served. The property that had been wrongfully taken from my family would be returned, at least on paper. The irony wasn't lost on me that Richard, who had spent his career in real estate development, had no idea that his own family's greatest real estate asset had been stolen decades before. At precisely 7:15 a.m., my phone rang. Thomas Green's number flashed on the screen. "Good morning, Martha. Just checking that we're still on for 9 a.m. at the courthouse." "I'll be there," I assured him, trying to keep the nervousness from my voice. "Excellent. One more thing. There's been quite a bit of media interest in this case. Word has gotten out about the ruling. I've been fielding calls from the Westfield Chronicle and even some Boston news outlets." My stomach tightened. "Media? Thomas, I'm not interested in publicity." "I understand," he said gently. "But this is a significant legal victory against powerful corporate interests. It sets an important precedent for other families who might have been similarly defrauded. The story will get out one way or another." After we hung up, I spent considerable time choosing what to wear. It seemed suddenly important to look the part of someone who was about to become the owner of a $200 million property. I settled on a navy blue dress I had purchased years ago for a school board ceremony. Classic, dignified, and the most formal thing I owned. With trembling fingers, I fastened my mother's pearl earrings, the only valuable jewelry I possessed. As I was applying a light touch of lipstick, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I was stunned to find Lily, my granddaughter, standing there alone, still wearing her school uniform. "Lily, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at school?" Her long brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her eyes, so like Richard's, were wide with excitement. "Grandma, is it true? Are you really going to own the mall?" I ushered her inside, looking around anxiously. "Does your father know you're here?" She shook her head. "I told the school I had a doctor's appointment. Dad and Mom were fighting all night about you and the mall. I heard everything." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom called you terrible names. Dad finally stood up to her and said she was wrong about you. They didn't know I was listening." My heart ached at the thought of Lily witnessing such conflict. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't have skipped school. Your parents will be worried sick." "I had to see you," she insisted. "All these years, Mom said you were just a boring old teacher with no ambition. But you were secretly fighting this huge legal battle and nobody knew. It's like something from a movie." I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm, so characteristic of her 15 years. "It's not quite as glamorous as a movie, Lily. It's been mostly paperwork and meetings. But you won, against these big, powerful companies." Her eyes shone with admiration that made my throat tighten with emotion. "That said, the mall is worth millions and millions of dollars. Are you going to buy a mansion now? A sports car?" "I haven't thought that far ahead," I admitted, which wasn't entirely true. I had thought about it. I just hadn't landed on the extravagant lifestyle Lily was imagining. Right now, I need to get to the courthouse for the official signing, and you need to get back to school. Her face fell. Can't I come with you? Please? I've never seen anything important like this happen. I hesitated, checking my watch. It was 8:15 a.m. The signing was at 9:00. Lily, your parents... I'll text Dad right now, she said quickly, pulling out her phone. I'll tell him I'm with you and I'm safe. Please, Grandma. I want to be there for your big moment. How could I refuse the first genuine connection my granddaughter had initiated in years? All right, I conceded. But you must text your father immediately. As we drove to the courthouse in my modest Toyota, the same car I'd had for over a decade, Lily's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Richard. She showed me the screen, a series of increasingly concerned texts asking where she was, followed by relief when she explained she was with me. He says it's okay if I stay with you for the ceremony, Lily reported, thumbs flying as she replied. He says he's proud of you, Grandma. Those simple words, he's proud of you, struck me with unexpected force. When was the last time Richard had expressed pride in me? Had he ever as an adult? The courthouse steps were more crowded than I'd anticipated. Thomas was waiting for us near the entrance, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sunlight. Several reporters with cameras and microphones hovered nearby, and I noticed a group of suited individuals who I assumed represented the current owners of Riverside Mall. Martha, Thomas greeted me with a warm handshake, then looked curiously at Lily. And who might this be? My granddaughter, Lily Sullivan, I introduced her proudly. She wanted to witness history today. Thomas smiled at her. Well, Miss Sullivan, you've chosen an excellent day for civic education. Your grandmother has fought very hard for this moment. Inside the courthouse, we were directed to a conference room rather than a courtroom. Judge Eleanor Walsh, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, presided over a large table where various legal representatives were already seated. At the far end sat 3 men in expensive suits, whom Thomas identified as the current ownership group of Riverside Mall. Mrs. Sullivan, Judge Walsh greeted me. Please be seated. We'll begin momentarily. As Lily and I took our seats beside Thomas, I noticed a familiar face entering the room. Richard. My son looked like he hadn't slept, his usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled. Our eyes met across the room and he gave me a small, uncertain nod before taking a seat against the wall. Victoria was noticeably absent. Now then, Judge Walsh began, shuffling some papers. We're here to finalize the transfer of ownership pertaining to the property commonly known as Riverside Mall, pursuant to case number 2023 CV 4278, Sullivan v. Westfield Commercial Properties et al. The court has ruled in favor of the plaintiff, Martha Sullivan, finding clear and compelling evidence of fraud in the original land acquisition from George Sullivan in 1972. One of the men in suits leaned forward. Your Honor, we would like to note for the record that Riverside Holdings, LLC, purchased this property in good faith in 2005, with no knowledge of any irregularities in the original acquisition. So noted, Mr. Peterson, the judge replied crisply. However, as detailed in my ruling, the fraudulent nature of the original transaction taints all subsequent transfers of ownership. The rightful title reverts to the Sullivan family, represented here by Martha Sullivan as the sole heir. The formalities continued for nearly an hour. Legal language, clarifications, signatures on multiple documents. Lily whispered questions to me occasionally, and I did my best to explain what was happening. All the while, I was acutely aware of Richard's presence, his eyes fixed on the proceedings. Finally, Judge Walsh signed the last document with a flourish. It is the judgment of this court that 65% ownership of the property known as Riverside Mall, including all structures and businesses thereon, is hereby transferred to Martha Sullivan, effective immediately. She handed me a copy of the signed order. Congratulations, Mrs. Sullivan. Justice delayed is still justice. As we exited the conference room, reporters surged forward with questions. Mrs. Sullivan, how does it feel to win such a significant case? Will you make changes to the mall's operations? Is it true your son and daughter-in-law were banned from the property yesterday? Thomas skillfully deflected most of the questions. guiding me toward the exit with Lily close behind. Richard approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance from the reporters. "Mom," he said quietly, "could we talk? Maybe coffee somewhere?" Before I could respond, Lily interjected, "Dad, did you see it? Grandma owns the mall now, legally and everything." Richard smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "I saw, sweetheart. It's quite something." He turned back to me. "Mom, please, just a few minutes." I studied my son's face. The boy I had raised, the man who had drifted away, now standing before me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Humility. "There's a cafe across the street," I suggested. "Lily, would you mind giving your father and me a moment alone?" "I'll wait right outside," she promised, barely containing her excitement as she bounced ahead of us. The cafe was quiet at mid-morning. Richard and I took a table by the window, a comfortable distance from other patrons. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Victoria and I are separating," he finally said, staring into his coffee cup. "After what happened yesterday, well, it was the last straw in what's been a difficult few years." This wasn't what I had expected him to say. "Richard, I'm sorry if my situation has caused problems in your marriage." He shook his head emphatically. "No, Mom. This has been coming for a long time. Victoria and I, we want different things. After Dad died, I think I was so afraid of ending up alone that I latched onto someone who represented everything I thought I wanted. Success, status, connections. But these past few years, I've been increasingly unhappy. Why didn't you say anything? Pride? Fear? I don't know." He sighed deeply. "When Victoria spoke to you that way in the boutique, something snapped. I realized I'd been complicit in how she treated you for years. I'd stood by and let her belittle the woman who sacrificed everything for me." His voice cracked slightly. I was ashamed of myself. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Something I hadn't done in years. We've both made mistakes, Richard. But you didn't deserve any of it," he insisted. "You gave me everything. Your time, your love, your savings. And how did I repay you? By trying to impress people like Victoria's family. People who measure worth by bank accounts and zip codes. It's human to want acceptance," I said gently. "Not at the cost of treating your mother like an embarrassment." He finally looked directly at me. "When I found out about the mall, about what you'd been fighting for all these years while I was ignoring you, I've never felt like such a failure as a son." We talked for over an hour. Really talked, in a way we hadn't since before he met Victoria. Richard explained how the pressure to maintain their lifestyle had pushed him into increasingly risky business ventures, how Victoria's spending had escalated alongside his success, how Lily had begun acting out at school, unhappy with the superficial values being instilled in her. "She's been asking about you more and more," he admitted, "wanting to know stories about when I was growing up, about Dad." Victoria always changed the subject. She didn't want Lily influenced by what she called small-town values. Those small-town values seem to have served Lily well, I observed, glancing through the window where my granddaughter was happily chatting with Thomas on the courthouse steps. "She's a remarkable young woman." "She is," Richard agreed with obvious pride. "And she needs her grandmother in her life. We both do." He hesitated. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after how I've treated you, but I'm asking anyway. Can we start over? Can I bring Lily around more often? Can we rebuild what I've broken?" I thought about the years of hurt, the missed holidays, the dismissive treatment. But I also thought about the little boy who had once been my whole world, the child I had raised alone, the son I had never stopped loving despite everything. "Yes," I said simply. "We can start over." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you, and Mom. About the mall. I know you probably don't want business advice from me right now, but if you need help navigating the ownership transition, I'd be honored to assist. No strings attached." I smiled, thinking of the plans I'd begun formulating over the past 5 years. "Actually, I might take you up on that. I have some ideas for changes I'd like to implement. A community center, educational programs, health services for seniors. Not exactly the profit-maximizing strategy the current management would recommend." Richard chuckled. "No, but perhaps a better measure of wealth than quarterly returns." We were interrupted by Lily bursting through the cafe door. "Grandma! Mr. Green says there are reporters from Boston and even New York wanting to interview you." He says you're going to be famous. Richard and I exchanged amused glances. I think famous might be an exaggeration, I said, rising from my chair. But I suppose I should go speak with them briefly. Care to join me? As we walked back towards the courthouse together, grandmother, son, and granddaughter, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced in years. The legal victory was sweet, certainly, but the possibility of healing my fractured family was infinitely more valuable. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind. I gave a brief statement to the press, emphasizing that the case represented justice for my family rather than personal enrichment. Thomas arranged for a meeting with the mall management team, who were understandably anxious about the change in ownership. I assured them that no immediate staff changes would be made, but I would be implementing new priorities in the coming months. By late afternoon, exhaustion was setting in. Richard offered to drive me home, with Lily chattering excitedly in the back seat about all the things we could do together now. Can I stay with Grandma tonight, Dad? Please. We could order pizza and watch old movies like you used to do. Richard glanced at me questioningly. That's up to your grandmother, Lily. She's had quite a day. To my own surprise, nothing sounded better than spending the evening with my granddaughter. I'd love that, Lily, if it's all right with your father. As Richard dropped us off at Cedar Grove Apartments, he hesitated before driving away. Mom, whatever you decide to do with the mall, with your new position, I just want you to know I'm proud of you. Not because you won, but because you fought for what was right when nobody believed in you. Those words, so similar to what Sophia had said the night before, brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Richard. That means more than you know. That evening, Lily and I ordered pizza and settled on my worn sofa to watch old movies. She asked endless questions about her father as a boy, about her grandfather whom she'd never met, about my teaching career. For the first time, she seemed genuinely interested in family history beyond the glossy, sanitized version Victoria had curated. Grandma, she said during a quiet moment, are you really going to keep living here? You could live anywhere now. I looked around my small apartment, the faded curtains I'd sewn myself years ago, the bookshelves stuffed with beloved novels and teaching mementos, the quilt my mother had made that still draped across my bed. This place held my memories, my history, my identity. I might make some improvements, I admitted, thinking of the persistently leaky faucet and the drafty windows. But this is home, Lily. All the money in the world can't buy that feeling. She considered this thoughtfully. I think I understand. It's like in that movie we just watched. The real treasure was there all along. They just couldn't see it. Exactly, I said, amazed at her insight. The real treasures in life aren't things you can buy at Riverside Mall. Even though you own it now, she giggled. Even though I own it now, I agreed, laughing with her. As Lily eventually dozed off on the sofa, I carefully covered her with a blanket and sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching the stars appear in the evening sky. Tomorrow would bring meetings with attorneys, accountants, property managers, the business of being suddenly wealthy. But tonight, I savored the simple joy of having my granddaughter under my roof, of reconnecting with my son, of finally seeing justice served for my grandfather's loss. The dress that had started it all, that beautiful blue dress Victoria had forbidden me to touch, seemed trivial now compared to what I had gained today. Not just property or wealth, but the beginnings of healing for my family. Victoria's cruel words, "Get your hands off there, you poor old woman, you have no money for anything," had set in motion events she could never have anticipated. Sometimes life's greatest victories come disguised as moments of humiliation. You just have to be patient enough to see them through. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, as if the universe itself was celebrating my victory. Lily was still asleep on the sofa, her teenage ability to sleep through anything remaining intact, despite the momentous changes happening around her. I moved quietly through the apartment, preparing coffee and toasting some bread, savoring the peaceful moment before the day's inevitable chaos began. My phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas Green. "Riverside Mall management team expecting us at 10 a.m. Press still very interested in your story. Call me when you're ready." The reality of my new situation was still settling in. Yesterday I had been Martha Sullivan, retired teacher living on a modest pension. Today, I was Martha Sullivan, majority owner of the largest commercial property in Westfield. The transition felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. Lily stirred on the sofa, stretching her long limbs and blinking sleepily. "Morning, Grandma. Is that coffee I smell?" "It is, but you're getting orange juice," I replied with a smile. "Your father would have my head if I started giving you coffee." She laughed, running her fingers through her tangled hair. "Dad drinks like 5 cups a day. Total hypocrite." "That's a parent's prerogative," I said, pouring her juice. "Speaking of your father, he texted earlier. He'll be picking you up in an hour to take you to school." "Do I have to go? This is way more interesting than algebra. Education first, business empire second," I said firmly, falling easily back into teacher mode. "That's non-negotiable." After breakfast, Lily reluctantly gathered her things. "Will you tell me everything that happens today, all the details?" "Every single one," I promised as the doorbell rang, announcing Richard's arrival. My son looked more rested than yesterday, though still somewhat subdued. He greeted me with a hesitant hug, our first in longer than I could remember. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than expected," I replied. "And you?" "It was a night of reflection," he said carefully, mindful of Lily's presence. "I've made some decisions I'd like to discuss with you when you have time." "I'll call you later," I promised, watching as he escorted Lily to his car. After they left, I dressed carefully in a simple but elegant pantsuit I'd purchased years ago for school board meetings. I wanted to look professional for the meeting with the mall management team, but not as if I was trying too hard to impress. My mother's pearls completed the outfit, a tangible connection to the past that had led to this unexpected future. Thomas met me at the main entrance of Riverside Mall at precisely 10 a.m. The mall wasn't open to the public yet, but employees were bustling about, preparing for the day. Several of them glanced curiously in my direction, clearly aware of who I was. "Ready for this?" Thomas asked, offering his arm as we walked towards the administrative offices. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, taking a deep breath. The management team was waiting in a sleek conference room, 5 tense-looking executives in expensive suits, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and barely concealed hostility. Jonathan Pearson, the mall's general manager, rose to greet us with forced cordiality. "Mrs. Sullivan, welcome to Riverside Mall, although I suppose we should be welcoming you to your mall now." "Thank you, Mr. Pearson," I replied, taking a seat at the head of the table, a position that felt both foreign and strangely appropriate. "I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice. Of course, we're all eager to understand your vision for the property moving forward." For the next 2 hours, we discussed the mall's operations in detail. The management team gradually relaxed as they realized I wasn't planning to fire everyone or make radical changes overnight. I listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and made it clear that while I had definite ideas about the mall's future, I also valued their expertise. "I'd like to implement several community-focused initiatives," I explained, outlining my plan for a community center in one of the vacant spaces. Health services for seniors, educational programs for disadvantaged youth, job training for those re-entering the workforce. "Mrs. Sullivan," Pearson interjected carefully, "while those are admirable goals, that space generates significant rental income. From a business perspective, I interrupted gently. Building goodwill in the community creates long-term value that can't be measured solely in quarterly profits. My family's land was taken through fraudulent means. I intend to ensure that its return benefits more than just myself." By the end of the meeting, we had reached a tentative understanding. The management team would continue handling day-to-day operations while working with me to implement my community initiatives. As we concluded, Pearson pulled me aside. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's something you should know. Yesterday, after the incident with your son and daughter-in-law, Victoria Sullivan made some calls. She's friends with Caroline Bennett at the Westfield Chronicle, and she's been trying to plant a negative story about you." My heart sank. "What kind of story?" "Suggesting the documents in your lawsuit were fabricated, implying you manipulated the legal system. Nothing with substance, but potentially damaging to your reputation. Just thought you should be prepared." I thanked him for the warning, feeling a fresh wave of disappointment in Victoria. Even now, she was trying to undermine me rather than accept the new reality. As Thomas and I exited the administrative offices, we encountered James Cooper, the security chief, who had assisted me during the confrontation with Victoria. "Mrs. Sullivan," he greeted me warmly. "If you have a moment, there's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Thomas and I followed him to the security office, where dozens of monitors displayed views from cameras throughout the mall. James directed our attention to a particular screen showing the food court. "We've had a problem with teenagers from Westfield High hanging out after school. Nothing serious, mostly just taking up tables without buying much. The previous management wanted to ban them outright, but I convinced them to let me try something else." He pointed to a corner of the food court, where several tables were occupied by teenagers with books and laptops. "I worked with the school to designate this as an official study area from 3 to 6 p.m. Kids who maintain a certain GPA can use it, and we provide free Wi-Fi. Many of them don't have reliable internet at home. It's been remarkably successful. Discipline problems down, and they actually spend money on food now that they feel welcome." I studied the setup with growing interest. That's exactly the kind of initiative I want to expand. Community-minded, but also makes business sense. "Would you be interested in helping develop more programs like this, Mr. Cooper?" His face lit up. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Sullivan. And please, call me James." By the time we left the mall, it was past noon. Thomas suggested lunch at a nearby restaurant where we could discuss next steps privately. As we were being seated, my phone rang. Richard again. "Mom, have you seen the Chronicle website?" His voice was tight with anger. "No, what's happening?" "Victoria gave an interview. She's claiming the documents in your lawsuit were suspiciously convenient and suggesting you manipulated the court. It's disgusting." I felt a flash of anger, quickly replaced by resignation. Mr. Pearson warned me she might try something like this. I've already called my lawyer. We're drafting a statement condemning her allegations and making it clear they don't represent my views. I've also called Caroline Bennett directly and told her if she doesn't print a retraction, I'll never give the Chronicle another quote or advertisement for any of my developments. His fierce defense took me by surprise. "Richard, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do, Mom. I've spent too many years the not standing up for you. That ends now." He paused. "Also, Lily's school called. Apparently she's telling everyone her grandmother is basically a billionaire and offering to buy her friends new cars." Despite everything, I laughed. "Teenagers, I'll talk to her." "Thanks. Listen, Mom, about what I mentioned this morning. The decisions I've made. Could we meet for dinner tonight? There's something important I want to discuss with you." We arranged to meet at Maple Street Diner, our old Sunday breakfast spot from years ago, at 7 p.m. After hanging up, I turned back to Thomas, who was smiling knowingly. "Family reconciliation," he guessed. "Seems that way," I admitted. "Though Victoria is still causing problems." Thomas waved dismissively. "Her allegations won't stick. The court reviewed exhaustive evidence before ruling in your favor. This is just the desperate flailing of someone who's lost control of the narrative." The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings with financial advisors, attorneys specializing in commercial real estate, and potential partners for the community initiatives I wanted to implement. By 6:30 p.m., my head was swimming with information, and I was grateful for the familiar comfort of Maple Street Diner. Richard was already waiting in our old booth when I arrived, a cup of coffee in front of him and another waiting for me. "Still take it with cream, no sugar?" he asked as I slid into the seat. "Some things never change," I replied, touched that he remembered. We ordered meatloaf for me, chicken fried steak for him, just as we had countless times before, and fell into surprisingly easy conversation about the day's events. I told him about my meetings with the mall management, and he offered insights from his experience in commercial real estate development. "They'll try to convince you that community spaces don't generate enough revenue," he said. "But what they're not considering is the indirect benefits: increased foot traffic, positive publicity, community goodwill. Those translate to higher overall sales for retailers." "Exactly what I was thinking," I agreed. "I want the mall to be more than just a place to shop. I want it to be a community hub." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "You know, that approach aligns perfectly with some of the decisions I've been considering." He took a deep breath. "Mom, I'm planning to shift the focus of my business. For years, I've been chasing high-end developments, luxury properties, always more expensive, more exclusive. It's exhausting, and honestly, I'm not sure it's making the world any better. What are you thinking instead? Affordable housing, mixed income developments, projects that actually address real needs in the community instead of just catering to the wealthy. His eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. There's this property on the east side I've been looking at, perfect for a development that includes both market rate and affordable units, with green spaces, community gardens. The numbers work, but it's not the kind of project that impressed Victoria or her family. It sounds wonderful, Richard, I said sincerely. Is this because of what happened with us? He considered the question carefully, partially. Seeing you fight so hard for what's right, even when no one believed in you, it made me question what I've been working toward all these years. But it's also about Lily. I want her to grow up understanding that success isn't measured by the size of your house or the brand of your car. Our conversation continued through dinner and dessert, Richard sharing his new vision for his company, me outlining my plans for the mall. For the first time in years, we were talking as equals, as partners with shared values, rather than as strangers from different worlds. As we were finishing our coffee, Richard reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I found this when I was going through some things at the house yesterday, he said, sliding it across the table. I think you should have it back. Opening the box, I gasped softly. Inside was my wedding ring, the simple gold band with small diamond that James had placed on my finger over 40 years ago. I had sold it 5 years earlier to help finance the lawsuit, never expecting to see it again. How did you? Pure coincidence, Richard explained. I bought it from an estate jewelry dealer last year as an anniversary present for Victoria. She complained it wasn't expensive enough and put it away. When I was packing my things, I found it in her jewelry box and recognized it immediately. Tears welled in my eyes as I slipped the ring onto my finger. It felt like closing a circle, reclaiming not just my family's land, but a piece of my heart I thought was gone forever. Thank you, I whispered. This means more than you know. Walking back to my car after dinner, Richard made an unexpected proposal. Mom, would you consider partnering with me on the East Side development? Your community vision for the mall aligns perfectly with what I'm trying to do. We could create something truly special together. The idea of working with my son, combining our resources and perspectives to benefit the community, felt right in a way I couldn't fully articulate. I'd like that very much, Richard. 3 months later, Riverside Mall unveiled its new Community Connection Center in what had previously been an upscale department store. The space included a health clinic offering free screenings for seniors, a technology center where disadvantaged students could access computers and internet, a job training facility, and a community meeting space. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I stood with Richard and Lily beside me, surrounded by community leaders, mall employees, and many of my former students. As I prepared to cut the ribbon, I caught sight of Victoria standing at the back of the crowd, watching with an unreadable expression. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt no anger, only a kind of distant pity. Her world had been built on appearances, on status, on putting others down to elevate herself. Mine was built on something far more substantial: family, community, purpose. On behalf of the Sullivan family, I said into the microphone, I'm honored to dedicate this space to the Westfield community. This mall stands on land that belonged to my grandfather, George Sullivan, a man who believed in hard work, fairness, and helping your neighbors. Today, we reclaim that legacy not just through ownership, but through service. As applause erupted and the ribbon fell away, Lily squeezed my hand. I'm so proud to be a Sullivan, Grandma, she whispered. You showed me what that really means. In that moment, standing between my son and granddaughter, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the humiliation in Elegance Boutique to this triumph of purpose. From get your hands off there, you poor old woman, to creating a lasting legacy for my family and community. Sometimes, life's greatest victories emerge from its most painful moments. You just need the courage to stand your ground and the patience to see justice through. 6 months have passed since that fateful day in Elegance Boutique, when Victoria grabbed my wrist and sneered, "Get your hands off there, you poor old woman. You have no money for anything." Words meant to humiliate me instead became the catalyst for one of the most remarkable transformations any 72-year-old woman could imagine. Sometimes I still pinch myself in the morning, wondering if it all really happened. The Community Connection Center at Riverside Mall has become the heart of Westfield, serving hundreds of people weekly. Seniors come for health screenings and social activities. Teenagers gather in the study center after school, and job seekers find training and opportunities that change their lives. What was once merely a temple of consumption has become a true community hub. Richard and I work together now, combining my community vision with his development expertise. Our East Side project broke ground last month, a mixed-income residential community with green spaces, affordable housing units, and small business incubators. The local press called it a new model for ethical development, which made me prouder than any profit margin could. Victoria filed for divorce 2 months after our confrontation, demanding half of Richard's assets despite their prenuptial agreement. The proceedings are ongoing, but Richard seems lighter, happier without the constant pressure to maintain appearances. He sold their mansion in Lakeside Heights and bought a comfortable but modest home closer to my apartment, with a bedroom specifically decorated for Lily's weekend visits. Speaking of Lily, my granddaughter has blossomed. Free from Victoria's superficial values, she's exploring her genuine interests, volunteering at the community center, joining the school's debate team, and talking about studying social work in college. "I want to help people like you do, Grandma," she told me recently. Words that mean more to me than any fortune. As for me, I did make some changes to my life, though not the ones people expected. I stayed in my Cedar Grove apartment but had it completely renovated, fixing the leaky faucet that had plagued me for years, installing new windows that don't let in drafts, and updating the kitchen with modern appliances. I hired Mrs. Gonzalez from downstairs as my part-time assistant, helping me manage the flood of correspondence and opportunities that come with my new position. The blue dress that started it all. I bought it the day after the confrontation and donated it to a charity that provides professional clothing to women re-entering the workforce. Somehow, owning it no longer seemed important once I could have it. I've declined most interview requests, preferring to let my actions speak louder than words. This video for Revenge Expected is an exception because I believe my story might help others who have been dismissed, overlooked, or treated as invisible because of their age or economic status. What I've learned through this extraordinary journey is that dignity cannot be granted or taken away by others. It comes from within. For years, I allowed my son and daughter-in-law to make me feel small, to question my worth because I lived simply and lacked material wealth. The legal victory and sudden fortune didn't give me dignity. They merely revealed the dignity I always possessed but had forgotten to claim. If you're watching this and feeling undervalued or invisible in your own life, please know this. Your worth isn't measured by your bank account, your address, or the clothes you wear. It's measured by your integrity, your kindness, your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when no one believes in you. I didn't seek revenge against Victoria and Richard, though many would say they deserved it. Instead, I sought justice, not just for myself, but for my grandfather who lost his land, for my community that needed the resources I could now provide. True revenge would have left me bitter. Justice has made me purposeful. Thomas Green, my attorney, and now dear friend, often reminds me that our case has inspired other families to investigate land claims that were previously thought hopeless. 3 similar cases have been filed in neighboring counties, and his office now specializes in what they call generational justice, righting historical wrongs that have economic impacts today. At 72, I never expected to begin a new chapter in my life. I thought my story was largely written. Retired teacher, widow, increasingly marginalized mother and grandmother. How wrong I was. There is no expiration date on justice, on purpose, on reinvention. If my story has touched you in any way, I would be deeply grateful if you would subscribe to the Revenge Expected channel. Each week, they share stories like mine. Ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances, finding the strength to stand up for themselves when the odds seem insurmountable. These aren't just tales of revenge. They're testaments to human resilience and dignity. Please take a moment to like this video and share it with anyone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your power. Your comments mean the world to me. I read every single one and draw strength from knowing my experience has resonated with others. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated or belittled you? Your stories and perspectives enrich this community we're building together. Creating these videos requires considerable resources. Finding people willing to share their most vulnerable moments, recording their stories with sensitivity, editing everything to convey the emotional truths of these transformative experiences. If you're able, please consider using the Super Thanks feature to support this channel. Your contribution helps bring more stories like mine to light, creating daily content that reminds us all of our inherent worth and dignity. Remember, when someone tries to make you feel small, it often reveals more about their insecurities than your worth. My daughter-in-law's cruel words in that boutique, "Get your hands off there, you poor old woman. You have no money for anything," were meant to diminish me. Instead, they became the first line in a new chapter of my story. What cruel words have been spoken to you that might similarly become the beginning of your own transformation? What injustice are you uniquely positioned to right? What dignity are you waiting to reclaim? I'm Martha Sullivan from Westfield, Connecticut, former teacher, current mall owner, eternal advocate for treating every person with respect, regardless of their age or economic status. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you today on Revenge Expected. Until next time, remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in purpose, connection, and the courage to stand up for what's right.